And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, is it too honest to admit that your grandmother's cooking is solidly mediocre? And will drinking this powdered milk signify my allegiance with the common man and also the Latter-day Saints? And now, the podcast host who displays his Raspberry Pis like a master cookbook set designer, Pete Dominic.
That's right. Thank you, Pete Co. And thank you for downloading or pressing play or doing the thing that you do to get this podcast into your ear holes. I am Pete Dominic, and I'm very glad and honored and flattered that you are listening to this show, where each and every day I'll give you the news segment, at least Monday through Thursday, and every day, Monday through Friday, I try to bring you the best guests there are. Smart, brilliant, funny, thoughtful people just like you listening to the show. Great to see a whole bunch of you on Monday night in Boston. So awesome. Several listeners coming out and hanging out, and you know who you are. I loved seeing you guys. It was really great to hang out. I wish I could have hung out longer. They kind of ushered us out of City Winery, but great job, Jay Alcovan. He crushed it. It was a lot of fun and great to be back on stage again. Looking forward to doing some more dates when, frankly, I feel comfortable coming back out and performing in venues. I wanted to do this with JL, and I'll do certain other special things, and for the right money, I'll go pretty much anywhere. But yeah, I just don't have that kind of burning ambition to be on stage in a room full of people in most places until I feel more comfortable with the COVID thing. Although I may just be making that as an excuse, because I also love hanging out at home in the solar-powered shed doing this podcast every day. And today is no exception. Two awesome guests joining me. One of your all-time favorites, the legal eagle, Eric Segall, joins me today to talk about free speech as it relates to social media and whether or not government should have any say or hand in regulating it. He's at a panel of legal scholars talking about just that issue and several others. We had a great conversation. I'm very excited to share that with you. And for the first time on the podcast, Dr. Christine Montross, who's written several books. Her most recent book is titled Waiting for an Echo: The Madness of an American Incarceration. Dr. Christine Montross, writing all about mental health as it relates to the criminal justice system. Super important issue and an amazing, brilliant guest. And I got to hand it to myself. I think I asked really good questions and kept it to a minimum. I conducted a great interview with her. Both guests, awesome, really happy to share both of them with you. But first, the news. I've got a bunch of things to play for you and headlines galore. It is time for the last 24. Well, the big news on Monday was the bipartisan House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack, formally beginning its examination. They held a public hearing with testimony from police officers who defended the Capitol against the pro-Trump insurrectionist rioters, and I've got a lot of things to play for you on that. But the CDC also issued new guidance Tuesday. I should say, I think I just said Monday. Tuesday is what I'm talking about here in the last 24. CDC issuing new guidance recommending indoor mask use in areas with high transmission rates after data suggesting that fully vaccinated individuals are not just contracting COVID-19, but could potentially infect others. So in states and areas where almost entirely the Delta variant is rampant, you definitely have to consider wearing a mask, even if you've been vaccinated. I've got a couple clips explaining that from Dr. Fauci and Dr. Rochelle Walensky of the CDC. Also, on a related note, the CDC recommended Tuesday that all students in kindergarten through 12th grade are going to have to wear masks when they return to classrooms for the new school year. So it's far from over, folks, far from over. And other big news on Tuesday, Simone Biles dropping out of the gymnastics final in Japan. And it would seem like this is the week in America where a certain segment of our population, surprisingly, turned against American Olympians and American police officers, two groups of, athletes and law enforcement that the American right is generally supported, and not this week. Also, anybody who has emotions, people were making fun of Adam Kinzinger for getting emotional at yesterday's hearing, and also criticizing Simone Biles for dropping out, because people having emotions is also bad. These seem like fun people. I was plunging in and out of the select committee hearings yesterday on the insurrection, and I don't know if you watched much of it, but I found myself becoming really emotional, tears flowing down my face, and it's such an important and necessary investigation. And while I think it's hard to see it changing minds, it's still obviously critical for our nation not to forget what happened and what Trump created and led, and what is trying to, as we're watching it be rewritten right now. I forget who posted. I think it was Bill B. in D.C. used it as an example to talk about the fact that Republicans now are trying to rewrite what we all saw before our eyes, that they themselves were attacked. They're trying to spin it to be something that it wasn't, a tourist, it was a bunch of tourists, or it was there was a lot of love there, or it wasn't all that bad, versus what it really was, which is a lot of people thought they were going to die, and rightfully so. And several people did die, and a lot of people were injured, and cops had the shit kicked out of them and were so violently treated and disrespected. And this, of course, coming from the people who were always defending the cops. And they were, it was absolutely insane, but it's being rewritten right before our eyes. And so they want to rewrite the history that we know, that we don't want to know about, our ugly history. They want to rewrite that or act like that didn't happen, the things that happened long ago before most of us were alive. And they also want to rewrite what happened like 6 weeks ago. It's really important that I think that we acknowledge that that's exactly what's happening. And I've got a couple clips that I think that I'll play for you here that help make that point. But let's start with what I think, I was about to say what was the most powerful moment. The entire thing was so powerful. There was barely a lull. These 4 police officers, 1 Hispanic, 1 black, 2 white guys, 2 from the Capitol Police, 2 from the Metro Police, testifying yesterday, were really heroic in a lot of different ways. It was so moving to watch their testimony, their passionate, vulnerable, honest testimony. But I'm going to start with Officer Harry Dunn of the Capitol Police, big black dude. You probably watched it. You've probably seen him on TV. Here he is talking about being called the N-word, and he uses the word several times. So if it's not something you want to hear, then skip ahead, or I don't know. I think you got to hear this. The cable news outlets and the networks, I think, were also playing it. But here is Officer Harry Dunn telling the panel that he was called the N-word several times.
I told them to just leave the Capitol, and in response they yelled, "No, man, this is our house. President Trump invited us here. We're here to stop the steal. Joe Biden is not the president. Nobody voted for Joe Biden. I'm a law enforcement officer, and I do my best to keep politics out of my job. But in this circumstance, I responded, well, I voted for Joe Biden. Does my vote not count? Am I nobody?" That prompted a torrent of racial epithets. One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? This nigger voted for Joe Biden." Then the crowd, perhaps around 20 people, joined in screaming, "Boo, fucking nigger." No one had ever called me a nigger while wearing the uniform of a Capitol Police officer. In the days following the attempted insurrection, other black officers shared with me their own stories of racial abuse on January 6th. One officer told me he had never, and in his entire 40 years of life, been called a nigger to his face, and that streak ended on January 6th.
Well, many on the far right were saying that these police officers were crisis actors. Well, this is something that they only, a term of art that they only use over there on the far right conspiracy land, your Alex Joneses and others. So it went from crisis actors to just outright accusing, in this case, Officer Dunn, of lying that he was called the N-word. But several police officers, black cops, also have testified that they too were called, or given interviews that they were also called the N-word or racial epithets. So, come on, it's ridiculous, but a really powerful moment right there. And we also heard from Officer Daniel Hodges. He's the guy who you saw in that melee, just having his body crushed in the doors, his eye. They tried to gouge his eye up. They ripped his mask off. He was another member of the Washington Metro Police Department. He described how the mob descended into terrorism, booing and mocking the police as they hoisted American, Christian, and Trump flags. He said he'd been crushed in a door, bashed in the head, and nearly, like I said, had his eye gouged out. Here's a little of Officer Daniel Hodges.
Terrorists were scaling the scaffolding on both our sides, the tower that was in front of us, and attempting to breach the waist-high metal fencing that was the only barrier we had aside from ourselves. The sea of people was punctuated throughout by flags, mostly variations of American flags and Trump flags. There was Gadsden flags. It was clear the terrorists perceived themselves to be Christians. I saw the Christian flag directly to my front. Another read, "Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president." Another, "Jesus is king." One flag read, "Don't give up the ship." Another had crossed rifles beneath the skull, emblazoned with the pattern of the American flag. To my perpetual confusion, I saw the thin blue line flag, a symbol of support for law enforcement, more than once being carried by the terrorists as they ignored our commands and continued to assault us.
I mean, just cannot possibly imagine what it must have been like for these police officers on that day, the way that they are describing this. Just crazy. I'm addicted to watching all those videos. I've watched every one of them several times, and it's heart-wrenching and terrifying, but we have to talk about it. We have to know what happened. We can't whitewash this. And so Officer Hodges also was asked about his usage of the word terrorist, and he was ready for that question.
But I can see why someone would take issue with the title of terrorist. It's gained a lot of notoriety in our vocabulary in the past few decades. And we like to believe that, no, that couldn't happen here. No domestic terrorism, no homegrown threats. But I came prepared. U.S. Code, Title 18, Part 1, Chapter 113, B as in Brown, Section 2331. The term domestic terrorism means activities that involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, and B, appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States.
Really powerful stuff from Officer Hodges. And now let's listen to D.C. police officer Michael Fanone, who you've seen giving a lot of interviews. This guy's been an undercover mostly for much of his career, but on the day he put on his uniform and went right up to Capitol Hill and tried to defend the Capitol. He, of course, was brutally beaten and electrocuted several times, suffered a heart attack, and has been dealing with all kinds of, as you can imagine, serious emotional issues. Have many of these police officers, two of which, of course, took their own life. Anyway, here's Officer Fanone with a very powerful moment and testimony of his own.
What makes the struggle harder and more painful is to know so many of my fellow citizens, including so many of the people I put my life at risk to defend, are downplaying or outright denying what happened. I feel like I went to hell and back to protect them and the people in this room. But too many are now telling me that hell doesn't exist, or that hell actually wasn't that bad. The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful. My law enforcement career prepared me to cope with some of the aspects of this experience. Being an officer, you know your life is at risk whenever you walk out the door, even if you don't expect otherwise law-abiding citizens to take up arms against you. But nothing, truly nothing, has prepared me to address those elected members of our government who continue to deny the events of that day, and in doing so, betray their oath of office.
I mean, these guys all gave gripping, articulate, passionate testimony, and I've got more for you because I was really interested in learning more about U.S. Capitol Police Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, who is also a United States Army veteran who served in Iraq and tracked down IEDs. He said he was a lot more scared in Washington on January 6th than he ever was in Iraq. And in this gripping, emotional testimony of his, he recounted the horrific and devastating violence during the first hearing of the Select Committee investigating the insurrection. Here's a little bit of Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, who is originally of the Dominican Republic, but now, of course, a naturalized American citizen.
The verbal assaults and disrespect we endure from the rioters were bad enough. I was falsely accused of betraying my oath, of choosing my paycheck over my loyalty to the U.S. Constitution, even as I defended the very democratic process that protected everyone in the hostile crowd. While I was at the Lower West Terrace at the Capitol, working with my fellow officers to prevent the breach and restore order, the rioters called me a traitor, a disgrace, and shouted that I, an Army veteran and a police officer, should be executed. Some of the rioters had the audacity to tell me there was nothing personal, that they would go through me, through us, police officers, to achieve their goal, as they were breaking metal barriers to use as a weapon against us. Or they use more menacing language. If you shoot us, we all have weapons, we will shoot back. Or we'll get our guns, we outnumber you. They said, join us.
All right, man. Just unbelievable from Sergeant Aquilino. And let's go back to Officer Dunn, who was asked, what the congressman on the committee asked him, what do you want us to do?
I use an analogy to describe what I want as a hitman. If a hitman is hired and he kills somebody, the hitman goes to jail. But not only does the hitman go to jail, but the person who hired them does. There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them. I want you to get to the bottom of that.
Yes, all these police officers definitely blame and point to the culprit, the main primary culprit of the insurrection being the guy who told the lie for so long and basically told them to go up and fight to stop the steal, Donald Trump, former and now disgraced President Donald Trump. Well, Adam Kinzinger is one of the two Republicans on the committee hearing, and he's been getting a lot of respect along with Liz Cheney for putting the partisan politics aside to be a part of this very important insurrection and defend democracy. Adam Kinzinger got very emotional when he thanked these four police officers, and then, of course, he got made fun of getting emotional, and they said he was crying. I mean, whatever, his voice quivers here, but I thought this was powerful and important.
Thank you to our witnesses. I never expected a day to be quite as emotional for me as it has been. I've talked to a number of you and gotten to know you. I think it's important to tell you right now, though. You guys may, individually feel a little broken. You guys all talk about the effects you have to deal with, and, you talk about the impact of that day. But you guys won. You guys held. Democracies are not defined by our bad days. We're defined by how we come back from bad days, how we take accountability for that. And for all the overheated rhetoric surrounding this committee, our mission is very simple. It's to find the truth, and it's to ensure accountability. Like most Americans, I'm frustrated that 6 months after a deadly insurrection breached the United States Capitol for several hours on live television, we still don't know exactly what happened. Why? Because many in my party have treated this as just another partisan fight. It's toxic, and it's a disservice to the officers and their families, to the staff and the employees on the Capitol complex, to the American people who deserve the truth, and to those generations before us who went to war to defend self-governance, because self-governance is at stake. And it's why I agreed to serve on this committee. I want to know what happened that day, but more importantly, I want all Americans to be able to trust the work this committee does and get the facts out there free of conspiracy. This cannot continue to be a partisan fight. I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative. But in order to heal from the damage caused that day, we need to call out the facts. It's time to stop the outrage and the conspiracies that fuel the violence and division in this country. And most importantly, we need to reject those that promote it.
Yeah, I thought that was powerful stuff from Adam Kinzinger. I admired it. I had tears rolling down my face as well. It really got me. I saw this asshole Matt Walsh, who is the guy who was basically the catalyst for me getting called a pedophile like 8 million times, this asshole. He tweeted in response to that, "Men should not cry in public. It is unmanly and dishonorable. Rare exceptions can be made to this rule. We make far too many exceptions." It's hard to take that guy seriously because of opinions like that, but obviously there is a huge contingency of men around the world that think somehow the emotion, the honest physical reaction of crying, of weeping, of bawling, of tears coming down your face is somehow not manly, or it makes you look weak. And I'm here to tell you that you're not a thoughtful, sophisticated person if you believe that. I don't know. I don't mean to insult you or talk down to you, but you're not. Crying is fine. It's just fine. Nobody loves, I don't know. I was going to say nobody loves crying. I actually don't mind crying. Sometimes it makes me feel really good. It's like laughing or even taking a shit. Okay, sorry, it's not like that, but there's a relief there. There's that sense of catharsis when you cry, and I think that you don't want to cry in front of other people because you don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. But that's not your fault. That's their fault. You cry as much as you need to cry. Okay, fellas, I'll cry with you. I've cried with many men. I will continue to cry with many others. Crying is okay. All right, that is the PSA on today's episode of Stand Up. Crying is okay and is comparable to a bowel movement, apparently. I really should get some writers. No, I like improvising it all. Let's move on. Here is Liz Cheney at the beginning with an opening statement.
Every American, I hope, will be able to hear your testimony today and will watch the videos. The videos show the unbelievable violence and the inexcusable and intolerable cruelty that you all faced, and people need to know the truth. I want to begin by reflecting briefly on the investigation that we're launching today. Every one of us here on the dais voted for and would have preferred that these matters be investigated by an independent, nonpartisan commission composed of 5 prominent Americans selected by each party and modeled on the 9/11 Commission. Although such a commission was opposed by my own leadership in the House, it overwhelmingly passed with the support of 35 Republican members. It was defeated by Republicans in the Senate. And that leaves us where we are today. We cannot leave the violence of January 6th and its causes uninvestigated. The American people deserve the full and open testimony of every person with knowledge of the planning and preparation for January 6th. We must know what happened here at the Capitol. We must also know what happened every minute of that day in the White House. Every phone call, every conversation, every meeting leading up to, during, and after the attack. Honorable men and women have an obligation to step forward. If those responsible are not held accountable, and if Congress does not act responsibly, this will remain a cancer on our constitutional republic, undermining the peaceful transfer of power at the heart of our democratic system. We will face the threat of more violence in the months to come, and another January 6th every 4 years.
Powerful opening testimony from Liz Cheney, the former number 3 in the Republican House, being called a patriot by a lot of people on the left, I'm seeing. So it's interesting to see the reaction to Liz Cheney doing the right thing here. And the woman who replaced her in the Republican House caucus as the number 3 is Elise Stefanik, who originally ran as kind of a moderate conservative in her rural upstate New York district, but then went full Trump as a career ambition, and hopefully it backfires on her and she loses or gets, well, she's not going to get primary, but loses to her Democratic opponent there. But anyway, here she is yesterday having a press conference of Rome with Republicans, Kevin McCarthy and others, and she had the audacity to blame Nancy Pelosi for the insurrection, and Twitter and the internet blew up after she said this into a microphone while being recorded on camera as well.
It is a fact that the U.S. Capitol Police raised concerns, and rather than providing them with the support and resources they needed and they deserved, she prioritized her partisan political optics over their safety. The American people deserve to know the truth that Nancy Pelosi bears responsibility as Speaker of the House for the tragedy that occurred on January 6th. And it was only after Republicans started asking these important questions that she refused to seat them.
The audacity of Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Anyway, well, so then Liz Cheney was asked about those comments by Jake Tapper, the Tap Man, on the lead on CNN. Here's that.
I mean, that's obviously nonsense. Speaker Pelosi is not in charge of security in the House any more than then Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was. What's your reaction when you hear them try to blame Pelosi for an insurrection incited and inspired and even directed in some ways by Donald Trump?
Well, I would say a couple of things, Jake. Number one, this committee is going to investigate every aspect of what happened, the planning, the financing, the preparation, the motivation, what was happening that day in the White House, what was happening here at the Capitol, the security breaches at the Capitol. So for anybody to suggest that we aren't going to be conducting a complete investigation is wrong. Number two, if I were saying the things that you just played, I'd be deeply ashamed of myself. What happened is absolutely clear. We had, as we heard this morning, just intolerable cruelty. A mob that was assembled by President Trump was provoked by him. He lit the flame for what happened. We've seen that not just in the speech on the ellipse, but throughout. What this committee needs to understand is exactly what the details were of the planning and the financing. But for anybody to be suggesting that somehow he wasn't responsible, I think it's shameful.
All right. Well, good points. All good points. And great job to Liz Cheney. Can't believe I'd ever thought I would have said that. And now it's time to hear from the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who was asked what he thought about all this gripping testimony. I mean, America, so many people just glued to their televisions, their computer, phone screens, however you watched it, watching these 4 police officers testifying about January 6th. Of course, the Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, reporters caught up with him yesterday and asked him what he thought of it.
I had a good deal to say about that, not once, but twice, on January 6th and again on February the 13th. I don't see how I could have expressed myself more forthrightly than I did on that occasion, and I stand by everything I said on January 6th and February 13th.
Why not? McConnell, did you watch any of the hearing today?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
I was busy doing work. I serve in the Senate.
He didn't watch it. He was busy doing work because he serves in the Senate. I didn't see it. Too busy working. Oh, God. A lot of other Republicans said similar. I must have missed it. I just hate that excuse from politicians. I didn't see what he tweeted. I didn't hear anything about it. I don't know anything about that. Bullshit. That lives on the very, very peak of bullshit mountain. That type of bullshit excuse. Unsurprising, nonetheless. I also thought this was powerful. Always, whenever I hear Professor Eddie Glaude of Princeton talking, often on MSNBC, I got to get him back on the show here. I'll reach out to him as soon as I'm done. And I want to throw it on the show. And so here he is yesterday on MSNBC with just his initial thoughts on the hearing.
Well, it was powerful testimony. Like you, I was moved in every way. I was reminded, though, Nicole, of a study that came out of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats out of the University of Chicago. And it was a study of the makeup of those who protested. Most of them were older and more professional. Many of them came from counties, blue counties that voted for Joe Biden, but counties where the demographics were changing, that they felt like they were being displaced. That in some ways what was being revealed in the context of that study and over the footage is white resentment, white fear, terror, and panic, right? That there is this kind of motivation that goes beyond the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, but evidenced in our everyday lives that some folk are clinging to this idea that America has to remain a white nation. Remember, just really quickly, Stop the Steal has everything to do with voters in Atlanta, in Detroit, in Philadelphia, in Milwaukee, right, in Maricopa County, black and brown voters, young voters, right? So this is in some ways a white mob arguing for a white nation, it seems to me.
Seems to me as well. I've got nothing to add to that. But speaking of whites, let's go to Fox News, where Brett Baer couldn't help be honest about how important the hearing was yesterday and the first day. I mean, quite a splash on the first day, got to say. Here is Brett Baer on Fox News not denying the truth.
While Republicans politically are saying that this is a partisan effort and that they charge that it's not going to get to the questions that they think are important about January 6th, why were the Capitol Police so ill-prepared for what happened that day, you cannot watch this testimony and say that it's not a big deal. And you cannot watch this testimony and say that there are questions that are going to take us places that I don't think we know where we're going to go yet.
All right. And finally, that's Brett Baer on Fox News doing a good job there. And finally, I got to play this for you. It's like 4 minutes long. I promise you it does not disappoint. During a House Rules Committee meeting last night, Congressman Jamie Raskin directly confronted Congressman Andrew Clyde, who you may know from his comments, rather infamously, from back in May, that he said, if you looked at footage from January 6th without knowing what it was, quote, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit. Now, there was a 10-minute back and forth. I'm going to play, 4 or 5 minutes of this. And I just thought it was amazing. I just love Jamie Raskin. He does a great job here. And this Andrew Clyde guy is way, way in over his head.
Officer Hodges, Officer Fanone, who experienced traumatic brain injury, who had a heart attack after he was tased by some of the tourists or terrorists. Officer Dunn, Officer Hodges. Do you think that what they experienced was an attack by tourists or terrorists or violent insurrectionists? You got the opportunity to clarify for the whole country right now.
If you will read the first part of my statement.
I'm not interested in that. I'm asking you.
You're not interested in my statement, are you?
Mr. Chair,
you are not.
Can you yield to me for
I have read your statement once. The whole country and lots of people online believed your statement that it was a normal tourist visit.
That is not my statement.
Okay, well,
as you said, as you quoted, okay, and then you just misquoted.
Clarify it right now for America.
I just clarified it.
Okay, I'm asking you. The people who attacked Officer Hodges.
You're not listening to my statement.
Chair, are there no rules?
Reclaim my time. Excuse me.
I'm trying to get a.
Who has the floor, Mr. Chairman?
It's Mr. Raskin's time, but the stenographer cannot keep track of people talking over one another. So I would like everybody to kind of lower, those who need to leave can leave, but I do think that
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Raskin's time, and
thank you.
Let's not talk over each other.
Again,
Mr. Chair,
I spent several hours today with millions of Americans watching sworn police officers testify about their battle to defend our lives. The members of the House and the senators. And they took issue, not with, let's put your statement aside because you used to think that you've been misinterpreted by people, but they're taking issue with an internet meme that the people here were just tourists. It was a normal day. And they were saying they weren't tourists, they were terrorists. How do you react to that?
Well, I'm not responsible for an internet meme. Okay. We are here to discuss this amendment, Mr. Raskin.
Okay. So you don't want to answer the question. I appreciate that. I wouldn't want to answer it if I said what
we are here to discuss this amendment, and you are obviously not interested in that. You want to make this another January 6th hearing. This is not. This is the Rules Committee.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Clyde. You voted no on giving congressional gold medals to the officers who defended our lives on that day. 140 of whom were wounded, injured, dozens of them in the hospital. People lost fingers, people had their eyes gouged, people experienced traumatic brain injuries, people are experiencing post-traumatic stress syndrome to this day. And you voted no on extending congressional gold medals to them. Why did you do that?
Again, that has nothing to do with this amendment. But you know what I will tell you?
Oh, I'll bring it back to the amendment, Mr. Clyde.
That I co-sponsored an amendment, a bill to give a gold medal, 3 gold medals, to the Capitol Police, all right, for all of what they've done. It was introduced by Representative Gohmert. So I'm sorry if you didn't understand that, or if you didn't maybe get that information.
Okay, I'll reclaim my time.
I am not going to vote to give
Mr. Clyde,
Speaker Pelosi
you were one of
medal
21
because
members.
She is the one who is in charge of the Capitol Police and the Sergeant at Arms.
I'm sorry, Mr. Clyde, I'll reclaim my time. You were one of 21 members out of 435 who voted no. You voted not to award 4 congressional gold medals to the U.S. Capitol Police and those who protected the United States Capitol on January 6th. I'm just giving you the opportunity to tell us why you were one of the 21 members who voted against it.
I just told you, and you obviously didn't listen.
No, you told me about another bill that you said you sponsored that I never heard of, but why did you vote no on this bill, which was on the floor of the House?
The particular bill on the floor of the House, all right, was not appropriate. It was not. The bill that was appropriate is the one that I co-sponsored.
Really, what made this inappropriate?
Because it awarded those gold medals to those Capitol Police for all of the times that they have defended this Capitol. Back in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, not just one incident, because I think they deserve, because there were Capitol Police officers that died from gunshot wounds back earlier. Did you know that?
So you're saying this didn't go far enough? Is that your point? So you wanted to give the gold medal to these people, but you voted against it because you wanted to give it to them?
No.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, with that, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say forgive me, colleagues, but I spent 4 hours today with the police officers who defended our lives on January 6th, and the level of rhetoric in this room about defunding the police and standing by the police does not stand up to what we heard this morning. And I don't accept it, and I find the rhetoric dangerous, describing anything that took place that day as analogous to tourism. And I would urge my colleague to please go back and listen to those Capitol officers and how they reacted to the idea that there was anything remotely analogous to a tourist visit in what they suffered on that day. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
All right, there you go. Fiery back and forth. And you got to love Jamie Raskin. Hopefully you appreciated that. I like to give you longer clips here on the show, more context. I learned that back at Sirius XM on the POTUS days. We would play longer clips and speeches and context. People really appreciated that. I think there's an audience for it. And also, it's a podcast. You can easily fast forward or skip ahead if you don't like something. But I like to think I've got a pretty good mind for editing it and throwing stuff in there that you're going to get a lot out of and learn from. But I do realize it's 40 minutes into the show, and I haven't even gotten to my guests. So let me give you all of the rest of the headlines rapid fire in today's news dump.
Rabbit bat is flying near some campers in a clump. The bat is into sharing on today's news dump.
Oh, watch out. There's a rabid bat who loves sharing its rabies in our campsite. Let's get the hell out of here. This place is crazy. Let's start in Japan, where the United States of America are leading in the total medal count with 29, followed by China, Japan, whatever, the Russian. Like, they can't, the Russians aren't allowed to fly their flag because of their drug testing violations and corruption. They're not allowed but they can't call themselves. I'm so confused about this. Why are they allowed to wear the colors and I think play the anthem? Anyway, they're in fourth place. Australia, fifth. Great Britain in sixth. Italy, 7. South Korea is 8. The Netherlands, 9. And Canada is in 10th place right now in the Olympics. Superstar actor Bob Odenkirk collapsed on the set of Better Call Saul and had to be taken to the hospital. And love Bob Odenkirk. Hope he's okay. And just wanted to mention that because he's always been really cool to me. I saw this story and thought it was shocking, upsetting, and sadly unsurprising. A swastika was found carved, apparently, in an elevator at the State Department. Yeah, a swastika found carved in an elevator at the United States State Department. Not a good sign, folks. Things are heating up in the Middle East between Palestinians and Israelis. Palestinians were killed by Israeli troops in the West Bank, and they're lobbing shots back and forth at each other, so keep an eye on that, of course. The $15 minimum wage is becoming, or $15 wage is becoming a norm now as employers are struggling to fill jobs. I think that's a really interesting outcome of the craziness of our economy as a result of the pandemic. The monster who killed all of those people at the massage parlors in Atlanta is pleading guilty to the murders in hopes that he gets I think he's just going to get life in prison with the potential for parole, but probably will never get paroled. That's my guess, but what the hell do I know? In a Texas special election, the Republican who did not get the support of Donald Trump beat his opponent. Yeah, the guy's name is Jake Elzy, and he won the special election runoff in Texas's 6th congressional district, apparently, according to CNN. Without the endorsement of Donald Trump, the Republican overcame the former president's backing of his opponent, Susan Wright, to claim victory. So that's a pretty interesting development down in Texas. I'm not sure if it's a canary in a coal mine, representative of what's to come, the waning power of the former disgraced president, but that's still good, I think. Every state in the country has seen reported COVID cases rise week over week. That's not really good news, of course. 3 tech giants reported a combined profit of more than $50 billion. Apple, Microsoft, and Alphabet, which is Google, have more than doubled in value during the pandemic. How about that? Must be all those microchips in the vaccines. I saw a couple headlines referring to this horrible story out of Washington State where the heat there isn't just brutal on humans, but apparently the nonprofit organization Columbia Riverkeeper is making the case via video footage that salmon in the Columbia River are suffering too, experiencing heat nearly to the point of death. The headline is Salmon Essentially Being Cooked to Death in Hot Rivers. So it's a pretty horrible story. Unless you want to eat some cooked salmon, that's not really a funny joke. This is a climate change issue we're sadly probably going to see a lot more of. All right, that's all I've got for you for today's news dump. I want to get to my guest. It's already been almost an hour, and I haven't even gotten to the first guest. It's going to be a long one, folks, so strap in. If you've got a long drive or you like to listen to this over time, I really am excited about both of my conversations coming up. I talked with Eric Segall, who is again at the beach, this time at a conference, talking about free speech and government regulation and the First Amendment. We had a really interesting conversation about that coming up. But first, I want to share with you my conversation with Dr. Christine Montross, who joins me for the very first time. She is a psychiatrist at medical school at Brown University. Her first book, Body of Work, won a lot of awards, and her second book, Falling into Fire, did as well. I highly recommend both those. I learned a lot about her work in preparing for her, but her new book that we talked about today, just out in paperback, is titled Waiting for an Echo: The Madness of American Incarceration, and it is a very important book, and I think we had a great conversation. Dr. Montross is a super smart professor and a great writer, and she has done a tremendous amount of work in the prison system across this country, did a lot of research for this book, and I was really happy with this conversation, and I think you're going to like to hear it. So let's get it going right now with Dr. Christine Montross for the first time here on Stand Up. Dr. Christine Montross, welcome to Stand Up. Thank you so much for joining me.
Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Pete.
So I've talked a lot about mental health and criminal justice here on this show, and I'm really interested to talk with you about how you are really at the intersection of that. And so I wanted to just start with this kind of statistic I've heard over and over and let you unpack it and get into your book, which is that mentally disturbed, mentally ill people are far more likely to be the victims of crime than to be violent criminals, to commit a violent crime themselves. Is that generally a statistic that you find accurate?
Absolutely true. And in my work researching what happens to mentally ill people when they're in jails and prisons, that holds true even within the prison environment. So people are more of aggression or violence when they're incarcerated than they are to be the aggressors. Yeah.
And there we go. As soon as I started, there was a blip. What I think you just said was they're far more likely, even when they're in prison, to be attacked, to be the victims of crime than to commit any violent crime.
Yeah, people with mental illness more likely to be victimized when they're behind bars than they are to be the aggressors. Absolutely.
So when it comes to being in prison itself, I mean, you write all about this. This is the most important thing. It's making people more mentally ill, more disturbed. Is that the wrong word, disturbed?
I think more mentally ill is exactly right. I think I work in an inpatient psychiatric hospital. I work with people who are severely mentally ill, and I work on the intensive treatment units, which is like the psychiatric version of the ICU. So I see people all the time who are very mentally ill. They're actively hearing voices or seeing visions, or they're very paranoid, or they're really trying to hurt themselves or other people. And I definitely wanted to know, in writing Waiting for an Echo, what happened to them when they came in contact with police and served time in our nation's jails and prisons. And you're exactly right. What I found there was that people who are mentally ill become worse when they're in these facilities, but even people who are mentally well also become mentally worse when they're in these facilities.
Right. Of course. That's an even almost better point. They're okay, quote, okay going in, and they get far worse. How do you, let's take a step back now that we've kind of established a little bit about what the book is about and your work is, now, and talk about mental illness. Like, what is it? What are we talking about? How do you sit down with a patient and analyze them for kind of obviously a layman's understanding?
So there's a huge spectrum of mental illness, and I'm sure that many of your listeners are familiar from firsthand accounts of their own experiences. But, we're really talking about anything from depression, anxiety, substance use, post-traumatic stress disorder, all the way through to bipolar disorder with its periods of mania and depression, or psychotic illnesses like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, where people are really having periods of time where they're losing touch with reality. And as you might imagine, when people who are having trouble staying in touch with reality enter into correctional facilities, they're less able to comply with the demands that correctional officers make.
I admire your usage of the word correctional, knowing what everything you know about what's going on in there. And now that we've established that you're brilliant on the issues, how did you learn about this stuff? Why did you choose to? I think your own journey is interesting and relevant here, too, because Why did you decide to take your Ivy League degree in psychiatry and then go work in America's prisons? It doesn't sound fun or enjoyable. Not that psychiatry necessarily is the way you're doing it, but it sounds scary. It sounds dangerous. I don't know what how your family felt about that. And then, just a little bit about how long you've been doing this too, because your work is really relevant, your expertise here.
So I've been a practicing inpatient psychiatrist for more than a decade. And like you, I think I had this notion originally that the people who I would treat in prisons and jails were really different than the people that I would treat outside of that environment. And over the course of my practice in the hospital, what I found over and over again was that my patients were coming in contact with police and my patients were serving time in prisons and jails. And when I talked to them and asked them about how that came to be, I was really struck by the fact that most frequently it was not for any kind of reason of criminal intent. They weren't plotting big crimes. They were just often arrested and came in contact with police because of their symptoms. They were shouting in a Starbucks, or they were charging through TSA with a delusional belief that they needed to hop on a plane to save somebody. And in those moments, police get called. And then in the moment of the police encounter, there's a decision. Does that person get taken to a hospital like mine, or do they get taken to jail or prison? So what I really found was that the people are almost indistinguishable that I was seeing. I was doing competency evaluations in the jails and prisons. They were the same people that I was treating in my hospital environment.
You're talking about the difference of the path that some person might take and how you write about this, determined often by the actual arresting officer who responds to the Starbucks, someone screaming in the Starbucks, and that police officer can then decide to take this person to prison or to a hospital. And then, of course, that determines so many other things. I think that is so important and interesting. How much leeway do they have? And, we can talk about the reforms as you do in the third section of your book, maybe just on that transaction itself. I found that so interesting that the officer determines it. And furthermore, that we even have police officers responding to so many of these calls as opposed to people like yourself.
Right. So many points of entry that can really affect the trajectory of people's lives. So you identify them beautifully, Pete. The first is if somebody's having a health emergency, if they're in a car accident or they're having a heart attack, we call 911, and the people who show up are clinicians. It's people who can start IVs and start oxygen and stabilize a fracture and stop bleeding. And then they take those people, those patients in need, to a medical facility. That's not the case in a psychiatric emergency. So if someone calls 911 with a mental health emergency, the people who show up first are not clinicians who can intervene and treat, but instead they're police. And so right there, you identify one critical point of difference. And then the second one is, just as you say, that police are the people that make the decision about whether to take the person to an ER or to a jail. And that decision in the moment of the police encounter can have effect on people's lives for days, weeks, months, years to come.
I just want to stay on this one point because it seems to be coming up a lot in reform circles. And I think it's something that may resonate with law enforcement, which is super important to get their buy-in to have any kind of real reform, which is they shouldn't be responding to so many of these issues, incidents. And some police departments are trying some new things. I just read about apparently even in New York City, they're trying new thing. What do you think should happen, Christine? What should happen in cities, in communities across America, in any example you want to give when a call is made? I mean, I'll never forget the worst video. I'm sorry to take the mic here, just as this one anecdote. This woman calls the police because her son is having a mental incident. What is the language for an episode?
Right. Yeah.
And the police come and he has a screwdriver in his hand, which could be violent, obviously, and they killed him. They shot him dead. And it's like, this should have never happened this way. So that's just one example I've read about, but I'm sure you have a lot in your book here. What should happen here?
Yeah. So tragically, people with mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed by police than people who are mentally well. So those kinds of incidents, unfortunately, are shocking and devastating and not completely surprising because we know that this happens. So the exciting piece of this is just as you say, that cities are starting to talk about how to do things differently. Washington, D.C. and Chicago have announced that mental health clinicians are going to be first responders to psychiatric emergencies. There's an organization in Oregon called Cahoots that's been doing this for decades. And critically, as you say, they have buy-in from police. Police actually feel that the partnership is a really positive one because what it allows then is for police to be less inundated with these calls for mental health help and treatment and to be relieved of those duties by clinicians and then able to do more of their other policing work. So I think it's a partnership that has broad support and also is just more humane.
Let's get more into the book, Waiting for an Echo, and how you wrote it. It's written in 3 parts: our prisoners, our prisons, and our choice, which is, the best part because it's solutions and reforms that can help change the paradigm here. And let me just ask broadly, again, one more question before I get too specific. How much change have you seen occurring on this issue, forward or backward, since you've been and dealing with it, writing about it, and working with patients in prisons?
Yeah, there's definitely positive change occurring. So the policing reform, the kind of reckoning around policing is one piece. Also, states like Illinois that are eliminating cash bail, that's a really critical piece because I write in the book about pretrial detention, a huge issue in our country where people are held, presumed innocent until proven guilty. And yet people are often held in jail for long periods of time awaiting their judicial process, having not been convicted of anything, simply because they can't afford to pay $150, $200, $500. So states that are eliminating cash bail are really reducing the problem of pretrial detention. That's huge. And one of the places that I find an extraordinary amount of hope is that in a country where there's almost zero bipartisan agreement on anything, there is bipartisan agreement that we need prison reform.
You cut up for
Gingrich and Cory Booker on a stage together, talking about prison reform.
Actually, because you're talking about Republicans and Democrats working together. Actually interviewed 2 of them at Aspen Ideas. Cory Booker was one of them, and this conservative criminal reform policy expert was another guy whose name is escaping. But those are all good things. But I do also think, like you do highlight and seemingly think that the American criminal justice system is broken because our culture is so fucked up in that, you hear this phrase, cruelty is the point, a lot, in reference certainly to Trump and a lot of his supporters. Cruelty is the point if you don't start there. But you read it, I think, a little bit more academically in that we prioritize vengeance, I think is how you refer to it in American culture. Could you say a thing or two about our culture? Because that's really hard to correct, I feel like. Forgive my language, Dr. Montross.
I think you're exactly right that there's a philosophical question that's also at the root of this. We say we want safety and justice. That's what we say the point of our legal system is. And yet, decade after decade, year after year, the data shows we're not good at that we're not making our communities more safe, and our practices are unjust. What we are really good at is suffering and vengeance. That we've got absolutely down. So I think we're at kind of a moment of having to look philosophically and say, so let's be honest. If what we really want is to punish people in a way that maximizes suffering and vengeance, then we should change nothing. We're doing that really well. But 95% of the people in our nation's jails and prisons come back to our communities. So we disserve not only them, but also ourselves when we dehumanize and degrade people in these facilities. So if we decide, what we really do want, safety and justice, then that's motivation to change our methods.
You also write about, and there's obviously a tremendous amount of data and research about how much of a role your lot in life, who you are, the vessel you travel in, plays, and whether or not you end up in prison, frankly, or with dealing with all kinds of mental illness and addiction issues as well. And you talk about privilege, poverty, and race. Great chapter in the book about Born on Third Base. And You also talk about, it's a really great thought experiment that you and your privileged friends got together and admitted the crimes that you'd committed, which is fascinating. Can you tell me about that hangout and how I can get invited?
Yeah. So one of the things that I struggled with in writing this book was how to get people to care, right? There's this sentiment like, if you can't stand the time, don't do the crime. And this idea that the people who are behind bars are really fundamentally, morally and ethically different than those of us who live free lives. And as one of my friends, I was at a dinner party that happened to be with 7 other white people. And one of my friends asked me about this challenge. And it sort of led to this moment where we decided to go around the table and each of us list all of the crimes we'd committed over the course of our lives. And there were plenty of misdemeanors. There were felonies in the list, and only one person had ever had any kind of legal ramification, and it was expunged a year later. And so I think that what that really did for me was underscore all of us commit crimes. Every single one of us does. And those of us who land in prison do so often for reasons that have nothing to do with their character, but have a lot to do with their race, their socioeconomic status, their power in our culture.
Yeah, it's such a really interesting. I hope other people will do that. It's a fascinating thing to sit around and kind of even put it anonymously. If you didn't even want your close friends to know, I've done this. Everybody writes about obviously the drugs they bought and so on. And my audience has probably heard me say a million times, but I did get arrested for mailbox baseball. Mm-hmm. You know what that is? Did they have that in the Midwest?
I grew up in Indiana. I know what that is.
I know. Yeah, and also we did never get caught, but we used to throw shit at moving cars, snowballs, like whatever we had, food, and they would stop and chase us. We almost killed people. It was insane, the kind of things we did when we were young. But when we did get in trouble, I think back to your work, it's like my daddy knew everybody. Christine, like my daddy got me out of all kinds of jams my whole life. And most people don't have a daddy who is able to do that, or a mom or a family member that get caught up with this. They just get arrested and thrown in jail sometimes, as you mentioned earlier, without being charged.
And those differences, we all have those anecdotal stories, but they're not just anecdotal. One of the things that I really looked at was what do those differences say in their numbers? And what they say are that Black kids are more than twice as likely to be arrested than white kids for the same activity. They're more than 4 times as likely to be sent to detention facilities. So they're less likely to be sentenced to probation, less likely to be sentenced to community service. So those differences are really baked into our system. And if that's happening to juveniles, it's also absolutely happening to adults.
Can you unpack the idea of moral superiority?
Well, I think we all it's very comfortable to believe that we're morally superior, right?
Well, I know I am physically, but other than that, I've got my faults. I mean, everybody knows I am a perfect specimen, but other people, yeah.
It's much more comfortable to believe, especially if we're mistreating people in prison. It's much more comfortable to believe that the people who are there are morally inferior in some way to those of us who are out here. Because if they're not, which many times they're not, then we ourselves are participating in a moral failing of our own. If we're mistreating people for the same actions that we ourselves or our friends have committed without consequence, then that's our own moral failing. So it's more comfortable to just wash it off and say the people who are there are really different than we are. They're worse. They deserve what they get. They deserve whatever they get because they've wound up in that kind of a place.
You have a lot of anecdotes in the book which are profoundly impactful to the reader, to the public. When you learn about these people, most of us never will step foot in a prison, much less, be a doctor to any of these people. I don't know where to start, so I just thought it would be in this interview just pick one and tell us about one of the people who you've worked with, one of your patients.
Yeah, I think the incident that was most poignant for me in researching Waiting for an Echo was actually the incident that led to the title of the book. I was visiting a juvenile correction facility for 14 to 20-year-old boys. I was getting shown a little bit the dog and pony show, so I was getting shown the library and the classrooms and the job training without really talking about the purpose of the place, which of course is to punish kids. I said, what's the most severe punishment that a boy could get in this facility? And they said he can be sent to administrative segregation, which is the euphemism for solitary confinement. I said, for how long? And the psychologist there said, up to a year. As a neuroscientist, that was absolutely astounding to me, that you take a kid who's in this critical period of neurodevelopment and isolate them from social interaction, have his meals slid through a slot in his door to him for up to a year, and then think about the really fundamental neuropsychiatric damage that we would do to that kid. Later, when I was walking through the facility, I saw a young man in his cell standing on his toilet talking to the ceiling. And as a psychiatrist, of course, I see people with mental illness responding to internal stimuli. That's what I assumed was going on. I went to the next cell, saw another boy doing the exact same thing, and turned to the correctional officer and said, what are they doing? And he said, it's a real problem. They stand on their toilets. They found out they can talk to each other through the vents in the ceiling, and they have whole conversations that way. And in my mind, that was boys in an extraordinary circumstance trying so hard to have normal connection, normal interaction. And it reminded me of the words of Richard Wright, who said, I would hurl words into this darkness and wait for an echo. And if an echo sounded, no matter how faintly, I would send other words to tell, to march, to fight, to create a sense of the hunger for life that gnaws in us all. So that moment stood out to me more than any other in the researching of Waiting for an Echo.
Well, that moment stood out to me more than anything other in this interview, because we learned where the title of the book comes from and how good you are at just saying a quote right off the top of your head, as well as it illustrates how good you are of a writer. We should tell people you're also a very accomplished poet and have always used that in your work as well. Tell me another. Can you tell me about anybody else, maybe about, you talk about the tragic deaths of men who were killed by police officers. You mentioned that statistic earlier.
Yeah. So absolutely. We read about these in the headlines, people like Daniel Prude, the story that you describe. And that is unfortunately an unrelenting fact of our world right now. I think when I think about patients that I've treated, I treated a man who was admitted with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. He had served prison, and then he came back out of prison and was really feeling quite depressed, having trouble reconnecting with his family. His friends were still using drugs. He wanted to separate from them, so he felt alone, wasn't able to get a job because he had a felony conviction. And eventually we treated his depression, but he remained really troubled by nightmares that had to do with his time in prison. And I said, were you abused? Were you assaulted? What's the content of the nightmares? And he said, well, all of that happened, but the nightmares are about the loaf. I had no idea what he was talking about. And he said, you've never heard of it, Doc, neutral loaf? And I said, I've never heard of it. What I learned from him and then corroborated by researching is that there's a form of punishment in facilities across our country where jails and prisons take the leftovers of a meal, grind it all up together, and pour it into a loaf pan, bake it, and serve slices of that loaf to people who are in punitive housing or restrictive housing or solitary confinement. Some places actually have a recipe for the punitive loaf, the neutral loaf, nutritional loaf. It involves things like margarine, beans, and mechanically separated chicken. So again, it just spoke to me about the ways in which we intentionally degrade and dehumanize people when they're in these facilities.
Oh my gosh. That's unbelievable and so terrible, and it just marginalizes them so much worse all the time. How could anybody ever get better?
Right. Right. And you think about, you think about what we hope for when people come out of prison, but then you think about experiencing things like that and enduring these really basic human needs that we all have. We've already stripped away human connection. We're already keeping people apart from their families. We're already eliminating or reducing the way they can keep in contact with loved ones. And this was actually an interesting thing for me during the COVID pandemic, is I felt as though it was a rare moment of empathic connection for those of us that aren't incarcerated, to feel how wrong it felt to not be able to go to the bedside of a loved one who was in a hospital, and to not be able to attend the funeral of a parent, to not be able to see parents and grandparents, children and grandchildren, and then to realize the depression and anxiety that brought about in all of us. And then to think we're doing this on purpose to people.
We are. I mean, we are doing it on purpose. These are punitive measures. I mean, Senator Tom Cotton is fond of saying we haven't imprisoned enough people. So you can imagine what he thinks about what should happen in these prisons. We have a lot of Americans that are supportive of torture even. So, and a lot of this, the treatment in prison could be definitely considered and fit by the definition of torture, including, isn't there a profound amount of research in the world of psychiatry on what solitary confinement? I mean, you've touched on it several times, but wasn't it even a Supreme Court question of whether or not it was cruel and unusual?
Yeah, so it's been brought before the Supreme Court, and we have Supreme Court writings dating back to the 1800s that say that we think that we know the damage that people incur when they're in solitary confinement, and yet the practice continues in our country. I think the other thing to know, not only do we have documented ways that it damages people, it breeds aggressive fantasies. It makes people feel more detached from themselves. It makes them hurt themselves on purpose. And these are things that happen not just in our prisons, but when people are stranded on an island or working in a period of great isolation. I mean, we know this is what happens to any human being when they're isolated to that degree. We also know it doesn't help the things we say solitary confinement helps. So prisons that utilize solitary confinement do not see reductions in violence. They don't see better behavior from detainees. And so I think really part of the question of solitary confinement is not just, is it torture, which I would say yes, but also why are we using it anyway if it's not bringing about the goals that people say they have when they use it?
I can understand why, a lot of people have a fair question about, well, what do we do with people who are actually violent to other people? You've got to confine them away from folks. I mean, what do we do? What are we supposed to do with people who are committing chronic violence against other people? That's a simple question that I'm sure a lot of people listening to this conversation and generally want to know the answer to.
Yeah. So two different responses to that. One is the majority of people in solitary confinement are there from an accumulation of minor infractions, not for violence. The vast majority of people who are there, it's because they've disobeyed correctional officers, or they've had too many pencils in their room, or they've had too many stamps in their room, or they've refused meals, or they've refused medication. So it's an accumulation of nonviolent infractions that leads to most periods of solitary confinement. That's one. The other thing is that there are models of places around the world that have better success reducing violence in prisons, and they don't use solitary confinement. So you mentioned that the third part of my book is really about solutions. And one of the things when I was finding all these ways in which our prison system is struggling, it's not yielding the results that we want, there is a great deal of violence, I thought, well, who's doing it better than us? And the fact is there are people who are. So I went to Norway and Sweden, looked to Germany and other places where they show dramatic reductions in violence, dramatic reductions in recidivism, and partially paradoxically to our mind, but really what they're showing is it's that they achieve these reductions by treating people with more humanity and respect and dignity.
Yeah, I forget. I'm not really much of a Michael Moore fan anymore, but I figure one of his most recent documentaries, he goes to Norway, and there's this profoundly impactful scene. Did you ever see that scene in one of his films where he goes to this Norwegian prison, and he's dealing with actual guys who have been convicted, one of which I think was murder and other violent criminals, and they're all living together and even cooking with like sharp knives, where of course in American prisons you got to make sure that somebody doesn't even get his hands on a toothbrush because that could become a weapon, we hear. But there are so many other better ways to do it. But every time I think about that, and I'd ask you for some of those statistics or results or ways that things work, every time I think about it, I hear the Tom Cottons and the Rush Limbaughs in my mind saying, "What, you want to coddle them?" And of course, the answer to if they would ever engage in a conversation about policy is like, do you want to save money? Do you want to make society better and safer? Because if we can agree on that, we stop talking about punishing people to get to where we all agree we want to be. So what is it? How do we deal with that? That's the thing I always run up against. Like, you want to have these reforms, but somebody's going to criticize you or anybody else who pushes for these as wanting to coddle these violent criminals.
So that's the question, right? What's more important to you? Is it more important that people who commit a crime suffer, in which case keep doing what you're doing? Or is it more important that they leave prison and start paying taxes, that they're better neighbors, that our society's safer, that we don't have to worry as much about rising crime rates? That's really the question. I think the prison you're describing is probably Halden prison in Norway, where I went. And what they saw was that they had a recidivism rate of 60 to 70%, dropped down to 28%. They did have murderers, rapists, people who were in for assaults that were not committing any of these violent actions in prison and stopped committing them when they left. So if not coddling people isn't working, what Norway says is we stopped treating hard with hard and we started treating hard with soft. And what they found is it works, that when you have correctional officers that work more like social workers, that help people be future oriented, have job training, skill, education training, substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, they leave and they don't come back. That saves everybody money. It contributes to society more wholly. So are we willing to give up on this idea that it's important to be inhumane and that that's really at the core of our prison system? I don't know if we're willing to or not, but we know that that's what it takes to work.
I feel like your book, all of your work, should be necessary reading for all Americans, and but especially like policymakers at the state and local level. I mean, what have you... Do you know if folks that are making these laws that can create change are reading your work or others who are doing similar work? And is it causing them to rethink policies that clearly aren't working? What are you hearing after your book's been out for a year?
Yeah, I hope so. I think we are really seeing change. One of the chapters in my book is about Northern Correctional Facility, a supermax prison in Connecticut that was said to hold the worst of the worst. I really wrote about the inhumanities behind the treatment of men and women who were held there. The facility is now closed. I think we're seeing, changes in pretrial detention, elimination of cash bail, changes in policing. I think all of these things are positive, and all we can do, those of us who work in the system or have access to it, is shine a light in these places to show that our current practices aren't working and that there are other ways of doing things that point us in that direction.
There's one more question I want to ask you that doesn't, I guess, fit in with all this other stuff. And I'm not sure if you write about it that much in Waiting for Echo, but in your second book, I think it was Falling into the Fire, you write about the limits of medication, I think is the shortest way of putting it. And I just wanted to ask you, as it pertains to mental illness with folks who are incarcerated, what role does medication play? Do you write about that in your new book, which obviously I haven't finished?
Yeah, so certainly with such a huge number of mentally ill people in jails and prisons, 20% of people in jail, 15% of people in our prisons have serious mental illnesses. Our largest psychiatric institution in the country is the Cook County Jail. So we have more than 356,000 people around the country who are incarcerated with mental illness. So medication is obviously a critical piece of that, and providing people the treatment that they need and they deserve when they're in prison is important. But I would argue that we should not have people in a punitive facility when we ought to have them in a therapeutic one. That sending large numbers of mentally ill people into a facility that is punitive is not the right place for mentally ill people to be.
But to be clear, if you committed an act of violence, but you also have been diagnosed as mentally ill, it doesn't not necessarily matter. This is obviously probably very nuanced. The crime you've committed, you should be in a psychiatric hospital, not being punished and having to eat a Nutriloaf.
Well, here's what I will say. Most mentally ill people who are incarcerated have not committed violent crimes. They're mostly there for misdemeanors, crimes of subsistence, but oftentimes within the correctional facility, they can commit more serious crimes. So I write about a man who was trespassing at a convenience store, was paranoid and hiding behind a dumpster, wouldn't come out. The police were called. They took him to jail where he remained paranoid. He wouldn't come out of his cell, didn't have a dumpster to hide behind in jail. They forced him out of his cell, at which when he started fighting them off, he was paranoid. That's assault on a correctional officer, which is a felony charge. So he went from having a misdemeanor for a nuisance crime to suddenly being in a facility where his behavior earned him a felony charge. And a felony in his state carries a maximum penalty of 15 years in prison. So I think sometimes when we see violent acts committed by mentally ill people, if they had been in a different environment, they might not have behaved that way in the first place.
Oh, my gosh. I love talking to you. I loved researching the book, and I thoroughly enjoyed spending, half an hour talking with you today. This is such an important book. Dr. Christine Montross, Waiting for an Echo, The Madness of American Incarceration, out now in paperback. Go buy it. And thank you so much for joining me. Really, really important. I look forward to talking to you again.
Really enjoyed it, Pete. Thanks so much.
All right, Dr. Christine Montross for the first time here on Stand Up. Very excited to have her joining me and looking forward to talking with her again. That was really great. She's not on social media, but her website is christinemontross.com. You can contact her through there if you want. Definitely get both that book and her others as well, which are super important and interesting, as I mentioned, I think, during the interview. All right, now it's time to get to my second guest. He is one of our favorites, one of our regulars. He is one of my closest friends, and I'm always excited when he joins us. He's a constitutional law professor at the Georgia State University. He's the author of 2 books, Supreme Myths and also, of course, more recently, Originalism as Faith. He is at a legal conference somewhere in the Florida coast. That's right. It says that, I think, here at the top. And we caught up and talked about free speech as it pertains to social media, where, if ever, the government should regulate it. I think he's got a pretty unpopular American take here on speech issues that many of you might not agree with. I didn't necessarily agree with it all, but I'd love to discuss it more with him and hear what you think about my latest conversation with Eric Segall on Twitter, at eSpinSegall, of course. Check out past episodes of his podcast, Supreme Myths, which is currently on hiatus. Here it is. Let's go right now. Segall, the legal eagle. You're currently are you at a conference?
I am at a conference on the Atlantic Ocean in Amelia Island, Florida. Possibly the COVID hotspot of the world is an hour away, but that's a different conversation.
Oh, no way. You're in...
I think Jacksonville is being hit hard, I think.
Wow.
We're an hour from Jacksonville.
You're at the beach again. You've been at the beach more than you haven't been at the beach, I feel like. Is how I feel.
I've been at the beach a little bit, but this is work. This is work. Let me be clear. Let me be clear.
Well,
I just got done riding a bike, and that was hard.
A real bike or stationary?
And I had to decide which we rented a house because Lynn and the kids are here, and I had to make the decision which bike to ride. And people think vacations are easy, and then you have to make that. There's like 7 bikes in the garage, and I got to figure out which one.
Oh, that's hard. That is hard.
Yeah,
that's just
actually my Twitter. My Twitter good morning this morning could not have been more on point.
I love your Twitter good mornings, by the way.
Thank you, man.
I love them. I look forward to them.
Did you see it today?
No, I don't think so, though.
Boondoggle is a really good word for a boondoggle.
Oh, what is that in reference to? Yeah, I did see that, and I didn't know what the hell you're talking about.
The fact that I'm here on a conference at work, but it's also kind of a boondoggle.
What makes a boondoggle?
Well, so I don't know if I can say this publicly.
Well, then don't do anything. Don't say anything if you're not worth it.
I'm here. I'm here Monday through Sunday night through Friday. Mm-hmm. I have 2 substantive panels. One we're going to talk about, you and me. And then I'm mentoring young law professors, and I'm mentoring young aspiring law professors who want to go on the market. I'm doing both of those things. That's actual.
They want to go on the market?
To be a law professor, yes. So I'm doing mock interviews. I do mock interviews and train, prepare them for the process, that kind of thing.
So
I'm lending
that's interesting.
My seniority to these people, yes.
Yeah, well, that's good. That must feel really good. All young
people.
But
the reality is, of the 8-hour days, Monday through Thursday, Friday that I'm here, I'm working, some. That's why we call it a boondoggle.
I hear what you're saying now. Now I hear what you're saying. So what does SEALS stand for?
It's actually a really funny thing. Not the name, but the story behind it. Southeastern Association of American Law Schools, except we have virtually every law school in the country represented here, including Berkeley and UCLA.
Well, yeah, because who wouldn't want to go on a boondoggle?
Exactly.
Of course they're all there.
That's exactly what Pete. What the story of this conference is interesting, and actually, I think I can make this interesting even to non-lawyers and non-law professors. So, the American Association of Law Schools is this organization that basically runs Americans' law schools next to the American Bar Association, which also has authority. But that's our kind of authority, the American Association of Law Schools. They have a conference. I'll get to the good point in a second. Every January. It's a huge conference. It's always in New York or New Orleans or San Francisco. And it's completely and totally one-sided. 80 to 90% of the people there are liberals or progressives, maybe higher than that. So I stopped going to that a long time ago because it's not balanced. It's a rally, not a conference. Except a few years ago, a good friend of mine was president of the thing, and he asked me to do an affirmative action thing, and I said I would, but only if there's as many conservatives as liberals. So he said, of course, and I did that. But generally speaking, it's a rally. So there's this other guy who 20 years ago started this SEALs thing, and it's a whole different attitude about elitism and what schools are. Also at that conference, it's all Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Chicago, mostly.
And those are all the elitist law schools that look down upon the rest of you?
Yes.
So
this
annoying.
conference has people from those schools too, but it's much more democratic, much more egalitarian. And so I've been part of this conference now for about 20 years. And it's really great. We show up in shorts and shirts. We did a thing yesterday on, which we'll talk about, on free speech and social media. And it was great. And it's not people, we don't do panels with people giving speeches, which is absolutely the worst way to learn. I moderated the panel yesterday, and there were about 10 people there, and I just asked and then some people watching, and I just asked a bunch of questions. And a la Pete Dominic, the great Pete Dominic, we just had a conversation.
Yeah.
Not speeches, a conversation.
That sounds fun. That sounds interesting, or a good intellectual exercise. But could people in the public? Is it open to the public? No, you got to be a SEALs member.
No, although family members of mine have come from time to time.
Oh, I mean, just to tune in and watch. I don't mean. Although I would like to join you on the boondoggle. Why don't you bring me to one of these things that Lynn won't go to?
Say that again.
You should bring me to one of these things that Lynn won't go to.
She's more fun than you. I mean,
you're
a lot of fun.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying
she's more fun.
I'm saying we could spend some quality time. Like if Lynn doesn't want to go or can't go,
next time I will let you know when that happens.
Although I am starting to feel weird about sharing a room with another adult. Because, Val and I sleep in different rooms, which is, I think, the answer to a successful marriage, I've argued.
Yes.
But I recently slept in a hotel room with a buddy of mine, and he made all kinds of noises. And I was like, you know what? I never want to sleep in a room with anybody anymore.
Yeah,
that's my privilege.
I crossed that bridge. I'm older than you, obviously, just by a little bit. But I crossed that bridge like 3 decades ago. My brother and I, as you know, go to Vegas every summer, or we used to before COVID.
You don't share a room with him when you go?
My best friend and I go to Atlantic City sometimes.
Right.
I don't share a room with anybody except Lynn.
I respect that. I'm
so old now. I make freaking noises. I don't.
Yeah, you can get really close with even an intimate partner, and things change once you sleep with them. You learn a lot about a person. CNN's Mark Preston. I slept in a hotel room.
Good buddies.
We're really good friends, and that really deteriorated our friendship for a little while. The noises he was making and the things he was doing, it was just, they were horrifying.
No, we're too old.
Yeah,
we're old men. No.
We sound very privileged that we get our own rooms, but nonetheless. So,
I am privileged.
So you certainly are. So you're on a boondoggle. Let's talk about free speech. And
let me just say at the outset for people who have listened to us before, if you haven't, this may not mean as much to you, but so I am not going to have any strong opinions here. Like, I don't know the right answer. That's what makes it such a fascinating
what? To what's the level? You started already saying, what's the premise?
So here's the problem. Facebook and Twitter lead, and Instagram and TikTok, and Google all lead to a lot of really bad things and really good things. They do. It's like good things and bad things.
Kids are choking themselves out watching a thing on TikTok, right? That's what you're talking about?
I don't think that statement is controversial, right? A lot of good comes out of it, and a lot of terrible comes out of it, like January 6th, for example. So the question becomes, what can the government do, if anything, to accentuate and maximize the good parts of Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Google searches, and regulate the bad parts? And so we're so fast. So we had this big, conference about this, panel about this yesterday. Unfortunately, there was one European in the group. We normally have 2 or 3 for this particular annual thing. But let me just give you the European perspective first.
Just real quick, though, this is a question of what can government do or not do? Where should it not intervene? Not what can the individual media companies do?
I
think that's an important differentiation.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Well, so the American reaction to this among 95% of law professors is you can't do anything to them. They are a free speech vehicle, just like you can't make the New York Times either publish or not publish anything, unless it's, unless we're talking about, clear and present danger of the worst kind. The American position is, no, they have full First Amendment rights. Now, what's interesting, because they're private companies, so let's go back to first principles. The First Amendment only applies to the government. So I'm allowed, let's go through it in ascending order. Obviously, if I want to say no Republicans at my house for dinner, I'm allowed to say no Republicans at my house for dinner. After watching these idiots today, Getz and that woman from Georgia, they're all awful, evil people. Anyway,
those kind of Republicans.
We all agree that I don't have to have a Republican over for dinner if I don't want to, or a Democrat for that matter. That's my house. If I own a restaurant, absent some kind of state law, I don't have to have any. I can say Republicans only tonight because I'm a private company. I'm not the government, and the First Amendment doesn't touch me.
But you can't say whites only or women only.
Well, but the reason you can't say whites only or women only, Pete, this is really important. This distinction is going to be hard, but it's crucial. The reason a restaurant can't say whites only or women only is because of either state or federal laws saying that. It's not because of the Constitution or the First Amendment. Do you understand? It's a big difference. In other words, Congress has passed this law called Title VII that applies to all companies over either 30 or 50 employees, I forget which, that are involved in interstate commerce, which is all companies. And Congress, using its enumerated power to regulate commerce among the states, has said you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of race, gender, and now, according to the Supreme Court, sexual orientation and gender. But that's because Congress passed a law. Pete, without that law, there would be no constitutional prohibition on a private company discriminating because the Constitution doesn't touch private companies. It only touches the government. So let's go back over it. My house, my restaurant, my company, at a constitutional level, I can do whatever I want in terms of who I invite and who I don't. 49 states have laws prohibiting discrimination in employment on the basis of race. I believe it is 49. The one state that doesn't is, of course, my state of Georgia.
No.
But leaving that aside, but it doesn't matter because there's a federal law doing that. I mean, states have their own protections too. But the point again is a state can come in. So now here's what California did a long time ago in the 70s. California required shopping malls, private companies, owned by private companies, to allow peaceful, civil protests, even though they didn't want to. And that case, and what the mall owner said was, "This is like my house. This is like a small. You can't make me."
What were they protesting at the mall? JCPenney sale, an Orange Juliet. What was the protest at the mall?
They were
about?
protesting. No, they're protesting all kinds of people. Here was the idea:
building the mall.
Where can we reach the most people? Shopping mall.
Okay.
Not only that,
I see.
But the Supreme Court has said forever, meaning 1930 or something, that sidewalks, public sidewalks, are the quintessential free speech forum where people have marches and protests and pickets. And these plaintiffs made the argument. California made the argument that a shopping mall is like a public sidewalk, even though it's a private company. Anyway, the court actually upheld that law. And so the mall owner was pissed because he had to allow people on his property who he didn't want on his property, but he lost anyway. But it's not because of the Constitution. That's the most important thing everybody has to understand. It's because California passed a law. Now fast forward to Twitter, Facebook, and whatever, and other social media. So the government could regulate speech on those platforms that are outside the First Amendment, meaning speech that presents a clear and present danger. So, yelling fire in a crowded theater, giving away classified information, perjury, treason, whatever. But that's a very small amount of things the government can regulate. The big question, and what that Section 230 everybody hears about kind of has a role in, is can the government say to Twitter, you're not allowed to kick Trump off? Can the government say to Facebook, you're not allowed to make decisions based on political ideology? You're not
allowed to post misinformation about a drug.
Yes, about vaccines. Exactly. So that's the question. But that question has to be, there's two parts of it. Is it a good idea? And is it constitutional?
Right. Yeah.
Before we talk about those two issues, we have to remember that as we sit here, you and I'm looking at beautiful woods and you're looking at your beautiful backyard. As we sit here,
that's right.
Facebook and Twitter, if something goes on their websites that causes a lot of damage, either from defamation or whatever, the Section 230 thing gives them protection. You can't sue Facebook if somebody libels you on Facebook. So if Pete Dominick posts on his Facebook page, Eric Segall is a child molester, I can sue you, but I can't sue Facebook. And so a lot of people are talking about how they don't deserve that protection. And a lot
so
of
wait, can I sue 5 million people that called me a pedophile?
Yes.
Huh.
Absolutely. Don't. As your friend and lawyer, I'm telling you don't.
Why not?
But you could. Because you just make it more of a story. And they have no, unless you can find somebody with deep pockets, it's not worth it. Although suing Matt Walsh would be interesting. The problem is, Pete, you're a public figure. And thus the Supreme Court has ruled that you have to show malice. And let me just say about that. So the idea that public officials, mayors, governors, senators, members of Congress, et cetera, judges, that they have to show malice to recover defamation, I agree with that 100%. The Supreme Court has extended that to celebrities like you, Tom Cruise, whoever. That I think of you and Tom Cruise in kind of the same way.
You're not alone.
That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And you shouldn't have to show malice because people can destroy your reputation and you can't do anything about it. But anyway, let's go back to Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, 230.
And 230. So here's what so a couple things. Would the First Amendment allow government regulation of Twitter and Facebook like it allowed the regulation of that private shopping mall? That's the question. Now, the point, of course, I made yesterday, screaming into the darkness, howling into the void, is that when we say we in that sentence, should we allow that? In Europe, if we said we, we'd be talking about people's representatives who they vote for and vote out. In America, when we say we, should we allow that? What we're really talking about are 5 Supreme Court justices. And so let me just say at the outset, I don't know what the right balance is between free speech rights and Twitter's and Facebook's corporate rights and the betterment of society in general. What I do know is Roberts and Sotomayor know more about that than I do. And again, a la the great Pete Dominick, if I was really going to solve this problem, I wouldn't call in lawyers and judges. I might have one or two, but I would call in media people. I would call in people who have been injured by Facebook and Twitter. I would call in people who make money from Facebook and Twitter. I would call in all kinds of different smart people like you do on your show, get them into a room and figure it out and then pass laws or not. That's not how we do it in this country.
You were moderating this? I mean, did you submit basically your long held premise that, it's the court and it should be legislators making these decisions? And how did that go?
Within, I wouldn't let legislators say Facebook can punish Democratic speech, but not Republican speech or vice versa. But within great parameters, I would leave it up to the legislature. So as you might expect, there were a lot of people in the room, but there were 9 actual discussants, people who were there to discuss it, and then people watching. Of the 9 discussants, 8 were from America, 1 was from Europe, and the only one who agreed with me was the guy from Europe, who's a law professor from Europe. In Europe, they view this very, very differently. And part of the reason they view it, so for example, as you know, I think, Pete, it is illegal to display a swastika in Germany. I think you can go to prison for it. So when I said I would have no problem with making possession of the Confederate flag illegal and showing it illegal, everybody yelled at me except the European professor, who said that kind of makes sense because our swastika is your Confederate flag, which I agree with. But to us, not to you and me, but to those 5 or more lawyers on the Supreme Court, free speech is everything. Well, it trumps everything.
Yeah, well, so that's your opinion, though. So you think there should be limits on what you can display?
I would have no problem.
You also tweeted in defense of the ACLU, I believe, who defended a Trump supporter who had signs on their lawn saying, Biden sucks or whatever. Right?
No, so Biden sucks is not the same thing as displaying the Confederate flag.
Says who?
Says me. Just like I believe in Germany, I'm not positive about this, but I think in Germany and France, you are allowed to say things like, you know what, maybe we should rethink this whole idea of democracy and maybe we should move to a more totalitarian state. I think you can say that. What you can't do is flash that swastika in the face of people whose lives, families, etc., had been destroyed by the movement behind that swastika.
Well, then why?
Now, the counter argument is once you start eliminating symbols, there's a slippery slope.
Well, sure.
And I say no, there isn't.
I think there is. I think there is. Well, what about the Klan marching in Skokie? Peoria?
I wouldn't let him march in Skokie. I let him march in Mississippi.
What do you mean? Why? What's the difference?
So one of the formative experiences of my life. We're now not talking social media anymore, but whatever.
It matters. It applies, though.
Yeah. So after my freshman year in college, I went to live in Brighton, England, for a summer, and
on
this
the shore.
This near an ocean. I always end up near oceans, but don't try to go swimming in the English Channel even in July and August. It'll freeze your nuts off.
Yeah.
Anyway,
fall right off.
That's that year, 1977. Were you born in 1977?
Yep, 5.
Okay,
born in 75.
Shut. In 1977, there was this big debate about a far right, like Nazi type group that wanted to march through a very Jewish neighborhood in England, and the whole summer they were battling about this. And what they eventually decided was they can march, but no, they don't get to march in the most Jewish neighborhood in England, which is what they wanted to do, basically. No, you don't get to march in Skokie. We call that reasonable time. I call it, not Supreme Court, reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, which is if you want to march, fine. You don't get to march in the very place you want to cause the most pain and suffering to other people. That's my view.
I don't think I love that, though.
I know.
That's
Most
not
Americans
a very
don't.
popular. Can Black Lives Matter protesters march in a Klan neighborhood or a neighborhood filled with white supremacists?
Right. It's a great question, and I hold a lot of views. And by the way, so do you. I hold a lot of views that what is goose is not good for the gander on issues like that. The dominant group doesn't. I'm not saying they have different rights. I'm just saying we should recognize. See, what Europe does is they recognize realities. There's a lot of free speech in Europe. There is, and Canada and Mexico and other places. There's a lot of free speech, but it's not the only thing. In America, whenever there's a free speech debate, unless it involves national security, once it involves national security, the Supreme Court goes all, oh, you can regulate that, you can do that, you can follow reporters around, you can bug their phone, all that stuff. But if it's not, or obscenity, Supreme Court has decided obscenity is not speech. But that's stupid. Of course, obscenity is speech. But so is yelling fire in a crowded theater. But so is perjury. But we carve these things out. So here's where let's go back to Facebook and Twitter. Is it possible to carve out a small area of regulation for these social media behemoths, giants, monopolies almost, that we wouldn't carve out for lesser powerful institutions? That's a really hard question, Pete. In Europe, they would analyze it by basically balancing harms. We don't really want to regulate their speech activities, but we also don't want them to A, lead to violent insurrection, B, do libel and slander, C, maybe do obscenity, whatever. And they would balance it that way. Well, what American judges do, because of our asinine Supreme Court, is everything is a category and it's a box. And if it's a box, it's protected. If it's not a box, it's not protected, and there's almost no balance. And that's not the way to look at this. Pete, what if it turns out that January 6th could not have happened without Facebook? I'm not saying that's not true, but let's say it was, hypothetically.
Yeah.
Could the government then regulate Facebook in a way that prevents another January 6th? Well, my answer is probably yes. The European law professor's answer is probably yes. The American answer is no. And that's what we're talking about. The monopoly part of this is actually very important, I think. It's not that Twitter and Facebook have monopolies on social media speech. Obviously, they don't. But they're so big and so large. Right. And in their space, they're monopolies, in their own private space. We regulate. So your water, your sanitation, garbage cans, we have public utilities all the time that are semi-private, semi-public. And when that's the case, the free speech interests get more complicated. Should we treat Twitter and Facebook like the gas company, like the water company? The only reason we wouldn't, Pete, is because of free speech and the First Amendment. But I'm not sure I buy that. But I don't know, because obviously the last thing we want are government employees deciding what people can say and what they can't. On the other hand, when we don't have government employees doing that, a lot of harm results. No one is in favor of perjury, right? You're not going to find any human being who says, perjury is fine. You can perjure yourself and not go to. No, if you perjure yourself, you go to jail.
Yeah.
It's pure speech.
Well, I guess
Go ahead. It's always about, it's an implicit balance is what I'm kind of saying. And Facebook and Twitter are really dangerous.
Yeah, they are. And I mean, the difference is it gets outside the legal arguments of it. But the difference between a newspaper, a local TV outlet, or traditional media before the internet, I guess we'd say, and social media is that there were gatekeepers that prevented you from saying or printing something in the paper. And if you did say or print something in the paper that was bad, there were then consequences for your reputation. So now everybody has a channel, and the cops at the insurrection were crisis actors is something that is being bandied about today, the Newtown shooting crisis. Alex Jones can say anything he wants. However, of course, he's been deplatformed, so is Donald Trump. But the question here, getting back to what you're talking about, is whether or not the government is the one deciding what Alex Jones gets to say versus YouTube, Facebook, Instagram.
Well, although I think I would phrase it just
or Fox News.
The question is, can the government tell them they can't deplatform them? That's the question.
Not deplatforming them. Can the government say you cannot do that? Meaning, if Trump were in charge, you could say, Facebook, sorry, you can't do it.
The government would say Facebook can't take Trump off just because they don't like what he says. Right. You and I can do that. We don't have to have Trump over for dinner, and we wouldn't.
Yeah, but it's
and if I owned a restaurant, by the way, I wouldn't let him come in. I wouldn't serve Donald Trump, and I wouldn't have.
It'd be a strategic business decision.
It's really hard stuff, Pete, but it's also incredibly important stuff. And let me just say, I'm sure I'm relatively confident your non-lawyer listeners don't know this, but the court, first of all, let's talk about free speech for a minute. First of all, the very first First Amendment case ever was 1919 or 1920. There was no judicially protected free speech in this country under the First Amendment until 1920. So it's only 100 years old. Wow. It's not like it goes back to the original. The original meaning of the First Amendment has nothing to do with what we do today. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, when cable TV first started, the government regulated the hell out of it.
They did?
Yes. And network TV as well. Remember the Fairness Doctrine?
Well, I remember. Right. That applied. I thought the Fairness Doctrine was gone before cable TV took off.
It may have been. That was network TV. But it's the same principle for both, kind of, which is Well, strike cable TV for a second. When networks did it, when government regulated networks and newspapers, which they did a little bit too, but with networks, there was limited radio stations. There's limited frequency. There was limited frequencies.
Yeah.
So the court's position was you only get a license if the government gives it to you. They can put conditions on the license.
Sure.
And then what I meant to say was cable TV came in, and that whole model was shot. Right, shot. But still,
which is why it's such a. By the way, just real quick, it infuriates me when people learn about the fairness doctrine and then start arguing to bring it back, because you could never bring it back. It wouldn't never apply again. I mean, because people say whatever they want wherever they want. You can't demand.
No, but we could demand of CNN and Fox. You can't. You have to have both sides.
It would. No one would watch them anymore.
That's interesting. And the court would strike it down. And the court would strike it down.
But there's that too.
But Pete, what do we do with defamation on Twitter and Facebook? What do we do with that?
I have no idea.
I mean, you were the victim of it.
I certainly was. It was horrible, and I was at the worst worried that it was going to affect me permanently.
Right. So you can sue those people who called you a child molester, but you can't sue Twitter. And I don't know how I feel about that. I kind of feel like Twitter should be responsible if somebody uses it to call you a child molester. I don't
know how you could implement that.
Well, here's how. And we discussed this yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there are some places in Europe that do. I know there are places in Europe that do this. So I think a nice compromise might be, the court probably wouldn't allow it because our court sucks, but a nice compromise might be if Pete Dominic writes a letter to Twitter or calls Twitter and says, hey, 18 people are wrongfully and in a libelous way calling me a child molester. Wipe it out. Get that off take it out. If you do that, we're good. If you don't do that, I can sue you, and I can sue you, not the people, but you. Europe does that. There are some places in Europe that does that. It's like an official, you get notice, and then you got to take it down. That's not a terrible compromise, is it?
I just don't know how you prove such a thing. In my case, if we continue to sadly use me as the example, it's like
right. If I were writing that law, I would say if there's a reasonable cause to believe that you are being defamed, they should take it down until the person saying it can show that it's true. Behind the scenes.
And you're saying that is actually being done in places in Europe?
I believe so. Yeah, the guy yesterday from Europe said that. Yes,
it really is fascinating to just take a look at speech
around the world.
I just, I talk to my buddy in Australia every day, and he was saying something about it. I was like, I didn't realize it. And then I saw a news headline that some British woman was like anti-vax or anti-lockdown something. She made some big deal about it and misinformed people. And the Australian government deported her because of something she said. They sent her back home. Because of something she said.
Well, let's look at that may be going a little too far.
Maybe it's something she did. I may have that wrong.
Hold on, but let's look at another issue I've talked about before. There are no political candidate commercials in England,
right?
Within 60 days of an election.
Well, yeah.
I don't know what the rule is. Whatever it is, though, there's a very.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but I know that it shouldn't be Justice Roberts deciding it. That's what I know. Because if you want to run for office, I'm not sure you have a right to be on TV when you do it. I'm just not sure. I mean, you have a right to speak. You have a right to go out in public, but I don't know if you have a right to be on British TV, and I don't know if you have a right to be on CNN. I don't know that. There's so much harm that comes from it, and so much misinformation and lies. And so Pete, of course, one of the original rationales for all this is the marketplace of ideas will weed out the lies, and truth will emerge. And you and I both know that's a bunch of shit.
No, I wish that were true. By the way, I was wrong about her. She actually violated quarantine rules. So that's not saying something. But so they kicked her out.
If I put on Twitter, if I go on Twitter after we're done, and I write, "Don't take the vaccine; it will kill you. I know people who've died from it. Don't take it." I think the government should be able to say to Twitter, "You can't post that." I do. I think the harm of that, Peter, is people dying. People dying is more important than speech. People dying is more important than speech. I will stick to that proposition. And Europe gets that. We don't. So going back to the Confederate flag, let me give you a real case. A very interesting and I think hard real case. Texas allows you to put, personal license plates, stylized license plates. And you could say, go Cowboys or go Earl Monroe or
buy
go
guns.
Justice Roberts. Fuck the Supreme Court, whatever. You can't say fuck, but screw the Supreme Court, you could probably say.
It's a very long license plate. I have to shorten that to like.
What they decided you couldn't do was put a Confederate flag on there. And somebody sued. And the liberals, it's the only time this has ever happened, I think. The 4 liberals joined with Justice Thomas, of all people, to say that was constitutional. By the way, Justice Thomas was raised by a grandfather who had crosses burned on his lawn repeatedly throughout his life.
It was constitutional. You could put a Confederate flag on.
No. Texas could say no Confederate flag.
Oh, it was that Texas could say no to that.
Yes.
Was ruled constitutional.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And an American flag is allowed. I'm guessing the flag of Romania is allowed. I have no idea. But no Confederate flags. So that's kind of out. That case is a outlier.
That's government saying you cannot fly the Confederate flag. That's what they're saying.
Well, no, on a government issue.
Well, on that same thing, it's worse. It's fucking sitting there on a license plate all the time. It's worse than.
No, I agree with the case. Don't get me wrong. I'm just telling you, we're lucky Justice Thomas's grandfather had crosses burned on his lawn, or that case never would have happened that way. I don't really mean we're lucky about that, but his personal experience is what caused him to join with the liberals in that case.
Well, you think they would think differently about voting rights then?
And affirmative action, but that's so different. That's a different conversation.
But definitely voting rights.
I want to be clear. I'm not in favor of the government censoring speech. So
sounds like you are.
Your listeners. No, I'm not.
Sounds like that's what you're saying.
What I am in favor of is when a speech issue comes up, we view it in its totality. We view it in it not just, it's speech, so it's protected. Is the protection worth the harm that's going to result? And Pete, in America, most people say, no, it's not worth it. Free speech is everything. And all I'm saying about that is the same analogy I always give. We're the only country in the world that does it that way. All democracies have free speech. None have free speech like we do. So if I have an issue with my 13-year-old and I call Pete Dominic up and I say, you're a parent of daughters, here's my problem, and you give me advice. And then I call my friend Rob and he gives me advice. And I call my friend Carolyn and she gives me advice. And I talk to Lynn and she agrees with you guys. And I talk to 5 more people and all 10 say X. Whatever, don't do Y, do X. I might still do Y if I'm really confident I'm right, but probably not. I'd probably go with X. No other country does what we do, Pete. No other country. Unlimited,
that's true of several other issues as well, though.
Yes. But the speech one is the one that most speech and guns. Those are the two. Those are the two that we do differently than almost everybody else. Twitter and Facebook are absolutely entities that cause a lot of harm. They also do a lot of good. We should have an intelligent discussion about that.
Yeah, we have a great gardening group on Facebook. People who love gardening. That's been nothing but good. A force for good in people's lives.
I'm sorry, I fell asleep once you said the word gardening.
How's
that? You can tagline that. Segall said he fell asleep when the word gardening is used.
I can't believe that there's just no interest whatsoever.
Well, we can talk about Earl Monroe if you want.
No, God, yeah. I like gardening, you like basketball. Those are two things we never need to talk about with each other.
I wish that more people had access to, even if we didn't change a thing, the European perspective on rights in general.
Yeah, it's
and free speech specifically.
Yeah, maybe we should have, maybe you should bring somebody on from over there to explain.
Oh, I should do that. Yeah. I'll work on that. Yeah, I'll work on that. That's the problem. There's sometimes sometimes it's not easy to understand.
Find someone who's understandable. It shouldn't be too hard. Yeah, everybody's got.
But don't you? So let me just close this out by asking. So don't you think when we decide our free speech issues involving social media, we should at least ask the question what other countries are doing?
I think that should be the case for every single thing. All policies
we almost never
that affect large groups of people. Each community. should look what another community does in its own state, in its own county, much less. Of course, I mean, I come to you to ask you about what you do with, as I said earlier, parenting or marriage. Of course we should. Of course. Well, I don't understand any argument otherwise.
Well, the late, great Justice Scalia would have yelled at you.
Why?
And said, so just one of the things Justice Kennedy wrote in his various gay rights opinions was that although in America, this, and this, Europe has a very different view on this. And not that we're not bound. Of course, no, I'm not arguing. He wasn't arguing that we're bound by what Europe does. But we should look at it because they're smart. And we, Scalia went nuts in dissent and said we should never look at foreign governments. It's not relevant. We have a unique constitution, blah, 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 blah. Because Scalia
We don't have a unique constitution. Our constitution is based on other constitutions.
No. Other constitutions are based on our constitution.
We were influenced heavily by the UK. No, we were not influenced.
No, we were influenced by Montesquieu and Locke and by the Magna Carta.
That's what I said. But I said.
But we were the first. We were the first.
Let me finish. I would have mentioned Montesquieu and the law and the Carta. You interrupted me. You jumped all over me.
I went too fast. I'm really sorry. I want to be clear that our Constitution is one that was emulated, not the other way around. The difference is in other countries, everybody gets to opine on the Constitution, and in our country, just the Supreme Court gets to opine on the Constitution. That's the big difference. I will say this. I will say that I think the issues involving social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the First Amendment are really complicated and really hard, and I hope we have smart people thinking about
this. Yeah, well, I think that we do. I think there are a lot, and I'm sure a lot of them were on that coast with you on the boondoggle trip, and I'd like to hear from more of them, and certainly a European perspective. So make it happen.
Yeah. I'll make it so.
Make it, I have spoken.
Do you know what that's a reference to? You don't.
May the Lord be open. Do you know what that's in reference to?
No. So your listeners are laughing at you right now.
Make it so is a Star Trek reference.
Oh, you got
May
it.
the Lord open?
Yes, but it's a fake Star Trek reference.
It is?
Star Trek New Generation isn't Star Trek. There's no Star Trek.
Oh, now you're alienating. Wow. Is that a widely held Trekker?
No, people hate me for it.
Yeah.
People fucking hate me for it. I am a Star Trek originalist 100% of the way.
I'm going to have you debate with my friend Alec, who's created...
Those other shows might be good and entertaining, but they're not Star Trek. I will sum it up to you like this. Captain Picard, who said make it so, Captain Picard, the actor who played Captain Picard, Patrick Stewart, I think that's his name, is a great Shakespearean actor who has a career before and after Star Trek and who is an actor. He's like a real actor. Every single cast member in the original Star Trek, from William Shatner's Captain Kirk all the way down, are terrible, overacting, underacting, not good actors, but each and every one was born to play that role. And that's
such an insulting generalization.
And William Shatner went to my uncle as a dentist because he's from Canada and so is my uncle.
I love Shatner. I interviewed him. He's a riot.
He is great. I love him.
You think Leonard Nimoy?
He doesn't take himself too seriously.
Nimoy? No, he's hilarious. Nimoy's a bad actor?
He was. He's now dead.
Wow.
There's a famous Columbo episode.
Yeah.
Remember Columbo? The show Columbo?
Yeah. Peter Falk.
So Leonard Nimoy played a doctor who killed somebody. Watch that sometime and tell me what kind of actor he is. And when we get to Chekhov and Sulu and all those people, they had one role to play and they played it to perfection. None of the other Star Treks are like.
Wow, I'd love to know what people who heard this controversial take think, including Alec Peters.
They're going to hate it.
Alec Peters, a longtime listener, has his own Star Trek spinoff called Axanar. Everybody should check it out. I'd love to know what you think of it. AXANAR.com.
I am not a Trekkie. I want to be clear.
Sounds like you are a Trekkie.
I am not a Trekkie.
Well,
what I am is somebody who knows the reality that the original Star Trek was about 25 years ahead of its time. And Pete, they had an episode where there was two aliens fighting each other. They both were half white, half black. Their faces were painted half black, half white. And Captain Kirk this is serious. Captain Kirk could not understand why they hated each other. They both looked the same. And Frank Gorshin, who played the Riddler on Batman, remember Frank Gorshin?
Yeah.
He's a great actor. He was one of the two people, aliens, as was the other guy. And Frank Gorshin looks at him and goes, "What are you talking about? He's white on the left side and black on the right side. I'm black on the right side and white on the left side. We're totally different." The point, obviously, is, I don't have to say what the point about that is, right? And that's 1967. And they had overpopulation episodes. They had climate change episodes in the fucking 60s. Oh,
Wow.
I'm done on this.
Is that all a result of Roddenberry?
Yes, 100%.
All right.
100%. Yeah.
Well, live long and prosper.
There is nothing in Star Trek: The New Generation or the next 15 that remotely compares to any of that.
Wow.
Yeah, people are going to boycott you now. So
I don't know. They're not going to boycott me. I didn't say that. You said that. I allow.
They're going to boycott you
for free speech on this show.
And you're allowed, it turns out, but not if.
Wow.
We can end where we began.
Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure, my friend.
Isn't he great? Always great. Love it. Love that conversation. Learned a lot. Very thoughtful, thought-provoking, and that's what the program is each and every day here on Stand Up. So tell your friends about it and sign up for a paid subscription if you haven't, because I can't do it without your support. It is a free show, and some of you have been freeloading, so sign up, because while it's free, it's not cheap. Go to patreon.com/PeteDominic or head over to the show notes and click on the paid subscription link and sign up for a subscription now. What have you been waiting for? Come on, folks. Thank you to my guest, Dr. Christine Montross, Professor Eric Segall. Thank you for the jingles from Pete Coe. Follow Pete on Twitter. Hire him. He does voiceover at Pete Coe, Coevo on Twitter. Pete Coe, VO. And, of course, John Carroll on Twitter. Saw John on Monday night. Got to finally meet him in person, which is really cool. He and his wife, Meredith, loved having them at the show. Follow John, support John on Twitter at JDCarroll88. Buy all of his music, and including the song that he wrote for us, inspired by the program and this community that we've created together. It's called You Gotta Stand Up. Take it away, John, and I'll talk to you tomorrow right here.
With other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand